So, and by the way, we'll be having a break in the middle of the morning, so you'll be able to talk to the speakers then as well. I'd like to welcome someone that many of you, I think, already know, Doug Hochberger, who's the Chief Digital Officer of the Republican National Committee. He assumed that role in November after serving several roles within the digital channels in the Republican National Committee, including digital voter contact that we'll be talking about shortly. But before that, he was the Secretary at the American Action Forum and also the Ohio Digital Director on the Romney campaign. So please welcome Doug Hochberg. Thank you for coming, Doug. So let's start with the broader strategic view, and also characterize for me so we all understand that the ways in which the RNC and any national committee has to pivot from a national election, a presidential election, to now this coming cycle, which is all going to be happening on the local level. So how does the role of the RNC change in relation to the campaigns versus the presidential?
Sure. So in a presidential year, we really have one goal. It's win the White House. It's very easy. Everybody gets around it. In off years, it's a little different, especially in a year like this where both House and Senate are important. Our governor's race is important as well. We just had Ben from RGA up here who would probably make that argument. So the question for us is, where do we place then our strategic priorities? Is it House? Is it Senate? What is a win to the RNC? It changes. So it's really what then we sit down in December and January and February and try to figure out what are the wins that we're looking for this year. So that really does then end up shaping the conversation for what we do. It's just easier in a presidential year because you have one mission and that's it.
And you have different relationships with each of the campaigns as well. It's not a singular relationship.
Exactly.
Anymore.
So when presidential year, everyone falls in line very quickly behind the presidential nominee. That's your path and that's who you're supporting. There isn't that coalesced group behind when there's Senate races in individual states, congressional races are in their own CDs, and the gubernatorial races. So yeah, you do have to deal with a number of different constituencies who are trying to run completely different races, and we're just kind of there as the support system to make sure that ground game's there constantly.
Since data is at the center of all of this digitally, how has both data gathering, data sharing, and the storage and the use of data evolved just in the last couple of years?
So just a few years ago, and this is probably something that everyone who you've ever heard speak from the RNC over the past 3-4 years has probably said, Chairman Priebus started this a few years ago, which is just this massive partnership with our data department and our political department and digital departments to make sure that we were basically the data stronghold on the right, so that we had access to anything we needed to do. When people were knocking on doors, they had the best information available to them. When we were making phone calls, they knew who they were calling. When we're targeting ads online, we know who we're targeting, our mailers, and that we're all working off of that same RNC data universe so that there's not a missed gap. If we know who we're talking to, no matter how we're talking to them.
Was there a data ownership issue before that? Who really held the right-wing data and who controlled it?
I think it was just spread out a lot more. And then when the RNC made that concerted effort, we work with Data Trust, and we hope that all the campaigns also work with them as well. But once we kind of made that clear shift from our building, that's what started kind of that movement, at least for us to be able to say, well, we know inside our room, at least on the right, we have the best data available.
How has the data gathering evolved in terms of how you're actually harvesting the data?
Sure. So it's a number of different ways. So the data that we use to help targeting ads, phone calls, all those pieces does come from our data department. It's surveys, it's consumer data, it's past data that we have. A lot of what we do from the digital side of the data is petition signings, email collection, ads that we run online. Social media actually has been a great way for us to gather new emails, just free for us actually. There is the ability for petitions to go viral.
Yeah, tell us about that, how they work.
So Basically, it depends on, I like to say it's kind of like a snowball effect, and hopefully you're at the higher point in the mountain when you start that snowball. So the RNC, our followers on Facebook, we have a couple million, so we're able to push things out and hit a very large group. If we say, sign this petition if you agree with X, we're able to reach a large amount of people. If the president's Facebook page puts that out, we're able to reach a lot more people. So, and it's completely free for us, those. It's basically you're advertising, you have a set universe that you're advertising to that's bigger than most people would pay for a universe at that point. So we're very lucky to be able to do stuff like that.
The RNC, was it 3 or 4 years ago, decided it was not going to do TV buying anymore. Why don't you explain that decision? Did that money then start moving into digital? How did that actually, in terms of shifting budget, what did that mean?
Yeah, so about 3-4 years ago, and with the exception of basically one ad at the end of this past cycle, the RNC doesn't run TV ads anymore. That money then got spread out between digital, data, political, and to be honest, this past cycle, what I've seen over the past 2 years at the RNC are huge leaps forward in how digital is respected with especially the political department. So 3-4 years ago, you would have never heard of a digital staffer sitting in a political meeting at the RNC. It just, and especially speaking during it, that would not have happened. This past cycle, Chris Carr, who was our political director at the time, Garrett Lansing, who was our CDO, allowed myself and Sam Osborne, who was at the RNC too then, to go to those meetings and invited us to go there and speak and tell them how digital GeoTV was going. And our numbers were reported to the field as if they were field political numbers. Setting that tone from last year, even though a lot of those same people aren't there, it carries through. So this past year, in one of the special elections, something that I don't think I've ever seen happen at our building before, I've talked to a few people, there was extra money in the last week of one of the special elections, and somebody suggested that digital should get the money to spend it, and they were from the political department. It was,
And they still have their job.
And they still have their job, and their boss agreed with them. So to that point, normally that would have said, let's do a last-minute TV buy. We can probably get more phones right now. There's one more mailer we could get out, even paid doors, all those pieces that normally is what they would spend money on in the last week. They said, no, digital should get the money. We can run ads online, and we can actually turn out the vote digitally.
That's interesting. That's a fundamental shift, really, in the ways in which we're thinking about how people are making decisions, where they're getting their media, and what that sort of path to vote is.
Yeah, completely. And I think the start of that was us being more connected on the data side and understanding that we're all working from the same base, to where now political, at least in ours, is getting more to the point that they are kind of agnostic to where they want, how they want their voters contacted. As long as they know that digital is using the same list that they would use if they were sending out a mailer, then they're fine with it.
Okay. So it's the data sharing that's actually key to that, is making sure
that we're not running off and coming up with our own ideas of how to target people.
Right.
We very much depend on our data and political departments to tell us who's the type of voter that we're contacting, who they are, and then we kind of tailor back from there.
And one of the things that you did with the money is buy a site.
Yes.
Right. We should drill into this. We're going to show a few slides around vote.gop, because tell us about that acquisition, and let's start drilling into the sorts of impacts you're seeing from that Get Out the Vote.
Sure.
site.
So vote.gop is a website that actually a lot of Republicans had been using for the past 3-4 years. Basically, we were renting the site starting in 2014 from a vendor had built it, and we were renting being able to use it along with a few other campaigns, and we were using it mainly for Virginia for case studies year after year, and we'd spin it up very late in the year. It was functional, but it provided kind of the bare minimum essentials we needed. It let somebody register to vote and look up their polling location, and then we weren't doing much with the data afterwards to retarget and do a lot of that work. In 2016, the same thing happened. We were able to get it up late. We got up for all 50 states for the presidential and had a lot more work in it because there was people full-time working to make sure it happened. And then in 2017, we bought it outright. So instead of other campaigns using it as well, we said we're going to take it in-house at the RNC. It's kind of our duty, we felt like, to be the ones who own this site, to make sure that it's legally up to date, that we have the right forms there for everybody. And by doing that, we can also develop it in ways that we weren't able to do before. So when you're spinning up a site, as pretty much everybody knows in here, and you have 3 months until election day, you have no time for new ideas on the site. There's no chance for you to say, well, if we were to do this, or if we were to target these people a little bit differently, the user experience, it's set at that point. So what we're able to do now is actually sit back and see what is the user experience on the site, what other tools can we put in there, how can we make it better. And I think, we saw in 2016, Hillary Clinton and the Democrats also had it was iwillvote.com was their version of it. So everybody, I think there's at least this level that everybody gets it should happen. And I don't know if there's a realization of how well it can work.
Let me grab the clicker. Sure. You want to go to the slides. Oh. Right. Because we have some numbers of around what you saw.
Just the
It might be next. Oh. There we go.
We'll skip around a little
Okay.
bit. So we'll go back to the ads in a second. But this is what I want to show you, and this is kind of what we found in 2016. So this chart, actually, we took some of our target states and we ran a case study after 2016. The first column is the expected turnout percentage. So our data department was within, I believe, 1/10 of 1% of expected turnout in the country. So nationwide, they were very accurate on who we knew was going to end up voting. So what we did is after 2016 in January, we took every person who came through vote.gop, we took all their information and said, could you run that same algorithm that you had and tell us what their expected turnout would have been? So that's those numbers in the first column. The second is then once the secretaries of state came back and said, here's everybody who actually voted, here's the real numbers, we took that same list of, hundreds of thousands of people and said, how did they actually turn out to vote? Did this site work? Did our program work? And what we saw were double-digit returns in turnout lift, which we ran the numbers multiple times because we were actually a little bit nervous that this wasn't right, because digital online, the hit that we always get is that you can't really turn out a voter, right? It's imaginary votes. It's only online people. It's not going to turn into real action. But what we found is that if you get somebody to go through your website early, it's not a magic site. It's get them to go through the site early. You get them on your email list. You're pushing them with emails every day leading up to the election. You're getting them then with ads because you're retargeting them properly. And you're hitting them in all these different ways. You're telling your data department who's coming through so that they can make phone calls.
How are you usually retargeting? What were the most effective channels, or were you able to differentiate among different groups of segment?
The most used is we do Facebook ads. Okay. So we use Facebook ads the most. But being able to take these universes and then upload them to Facebook and make sure that they're on ads, that's a huge piece. Okay. But as well, so it's just making sure there's this holistic feeling of somebody comes through a website online, they don't only live in the digital department. They're not our property. It's, well, political needs this information to make sure that there's somebody knocking on their door making sure they actually return their AB ballot that they requested.
Some of you may notice there are a couple of real important states here.
Yeah, so and we can take a look
cycle,
at it.
You've got Pennsylvania. You had a 17% lift in Pennsylvania. And again, we're talking about the people who went to that site. So this is the impact of the site on their likelihood to turn out.
So if you look, Michigan, huge difference there. There's enough people who came through the website that made a difference in the election. I can say that very confidently, that there's enough people who came through vote.gop who then voted that could have swayed the election. It was that close of a state. And we always talk about digital making a difference in the margins, that it's not going to win 4 or 5 points in an election. You need a candidate and a message and ground game for that. But when you're dealing with 2016, where this was so close, this can help sway it. And I think that's a great argument to be made for why more money should be spent earlier on digital versus any other medium.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about the timing of this site and how you cycle through when and where you're actually using it.
Sure. So as I mentioned before, past cycles, we were kind of handcuffed. We would spin up the site, legal would approve it, 2 months maybe before an election day, which really leaves you, you can, in some states you can still register voters, but in a lot it's tough to register by mail at that point. AB is pretty much closing up in a lot of states at that point to request a ballot. So your biggest key is to turn out on election day. And that's really all you're doing. Now that we have the site up every day of the year, we can start registering voters today. We have all the voter registration forms that they updated for the year. We can start registering them today. If there's absentee, if they're a permanent absentee state, we can start them on absentee ballots today and make sure that they're getting those this early. As we get closer to the election, we'll start talking to them about where their early vote locations are, where their polling locations are on election day. But we can start closing the registration gap today.
Now, of course, the key is driving people there, getting people to the site. So tell us about that strategy.
So for us, email is still king. We're not going to get a lower cost. We're not going to get the reactions that we get from people off of our, outside of our email list. But at the same time, we have to be growing our email list to new people. Otherwise, we're never, after this year, we're not going to win again.
Well, if you're urging people to register, you're off list, right?
Well, no, because there's a lot of, what we found actually, and especially this past cycle, we actually found a lot of people who are already donating to the president's campaign weren't registered to vote yet.
There you go.
So they were donors already once, and they decided, and then so we realized that and started sending them emails saying, if you really want them to win, you need to register to vote. But to that point, so there are people who are on our list who maybe will sign a petition on our website, different ways we get their email, but aren't registered to vote. So that's a start of it.
Let's talk about the creative strategy.
Sure.
Because I know when we were talking beforehand, you mentioned the value of simple.
Yeah.
And that one of the things you've been discovering lately in digital, especially as you're able to do more A/B testing, as you're able to get more feedback, is that simple messaging actually has longer term value and impact. Tell me a little bit about that. Do we want to back up? We can show some of those.
This is Senator Steve Daines. My Montana roots go back 5 generations. And as you know, there's a lot of attention on our state right now. Since President Trump asked my friend Ryan Zinke to serve as his Secretary of the Interior, we now get to choose who fills that congressional seat. Though Election Day is Thursday, May 25th, you can vote right now. So go to gop.com/Montana Votes to request your absentee ballot today.
So really what I wanted to show is 2 very, simple examples of ads that we ran during the special elections. What we found is that because of the volume that we're going through in a lot of the specials, we're cycling through ads very quickly before they become useless to us. So, we only have a few days, 4 or 5 days, to be able to keep an ad useful that someone is still interested in clicking on it and interacting with the ad itself. So having a graphic designer or a video team spend a week on ads doesn't make a lot of sense for us. And plus, we're also not the messengers. We have the advantage, to my mind, in we're not the messenger for the campaigns. It's their job to come up with what their message is to convince people to vote for their candidate. Our job is to turn out those people and just make sure that they do vote. So we keep our messages simple. The first one was actually filmed on a cell phone in our conference table with our content director coloring in a map and handwriting, because she has really good handwriting. It was really that simple. It took her 25 minutes. We did one for Election Day. We did one for AB. We did one for early vote. So those we were able to turn out very quickly. That was actually our best performing ad for Georgia 6. So it's something to be said for, it was basically free. I mean, we have good labor, we have really good staff. I can't say that enough. If you have a creative staffer who can do something like that, just let them do it. You're going to get better ads in the long run, and you're going to get ones that if you're paying a firm, at least you have something to supplement theirs, and probably both sets will do better in that situation. And the other one, it really came about because I'm a huge fan of Senator Dame's Snapchat. If you're not following him, I'm not kidding, it's really the best Snapchat follow on the Hill. It's him walking around, it's really him doing his channel. So we had a contact there, sent them basically half a script with bullet points of here's what you can say, here's what you can't say, based on laws and what we want to get out of it. So this was an AB one, so we said here's the date, here's the website, and here's what we need you to do. Can you just film it like you do any of your Snapchat videos? And we need it to be 30 seconds. And he sent back a handful of these that were great, and all that we had to do was put subtitles on it.
Now, that's an interesting point, because before we go to questions, I want to finish by sort of revisiting the famous social strategy of the presidential cycle. The RNC, in fact, Garrett Lansing, the former CDO of the RNC, was here last year, laying out in detail this massive operation that went on of social media buying that was happening at massive amounts of buying that was going on a daily basis with at tremendous velocity, but also with massive different numbers of creative variants that were going on and being optimized on the fly. And even competitions, those of you who want to go back to see Garrett's presentation last year, it's amazing. It includes that they actually had competing trading desks within the RNC competing against one another, not only optimizing on the social media channels, but actually competing with one another for the best impact. So as we go into the next cycle, what happens to that strategy? Are we going to be, because that's the opposite of this.
So
that's
these two,
massive amounts of
I
trading.
wouldn't say that these two are mutually exclusive, because what I'm showing here are simple ads. It doesn't mean we don't have 10 versions of simple ads with another 10 versions of copy that go with each one. So I mean, the scale that they were talking about, the hundreds of thousands of variants of everything, that's very difficult to duplicate in non-presidential years.
Okay.
But I don't think that those are mutually exclusive. It means that we have the 10 different ads running, different copy with each of those, so each variant adds up very quickly, and as well as the landing pages. You may not see it on GOTV, but you'll see it for our signups and for our donation pages.
But there are campaigns, especially say gubernatorial campaigns, I imagine, where there's got to be a fair amount of segmentation within the state. So we're going to start, so we'll see at some state level that kind of thing happening in miniature, where we're going to start seeing tremendous segmentation of audience and messaging even within a state.
Sure, and I hope the message that people take from this is that what they were doing was sending a lot of messages to a lot of people and picking the best ones that were performing. There was some segmentation happening. I think the hyper-segmentation that some campaigns have gotten into, which is trying to deliver a very, very specific message to a very small amount of people, it's really not worth your while, is what we've seen sometimes in the past. And that, especially with Facebook's new rules, any message that you're running as an ad better be able to be seen by every single person. Otherwise, there's going to be a lot of news stories run about it.
I'll save that question, but I want to open it up to questions from the audience. Anybody have any questions of Doug?
Hi, Doug. My name's Lauren Lombardo. I'm with Nielsen. You talked about the RNC moving away from traditional TV buys, which makes sense, but now with programmatic TV and addressable TV, where you can target individual households, certain TV spots, do you think the RNC will shift back to that, or that'll become a broader digital strategy for them to put some of those ads into specific households on TV?
I mean, I'll be just completely honest. TV buying is not one of my strong suits on this, so I don't know how the data matches up to what we're able to do on Facebook and other online avenues. But basically what we're seeing is that we can upload a universe into Facebook or some of the other places and get an 80-85% match rate that we know the exact person we're targeting, and we can hit them really where they are and get them to instantly click on something. For me, that's a great end result. I think there's an argument to be made for TV when you're messaging a lot more. For what I'm doing is trying to turn out somebody to vote on election day. I think it's a lot harder to measure that for me. So that's one of the reasons I don't like from my department personally, is that it's a lot harder for me to measure until after the fact if something's working, right? I know if I targeted them, and then after 2-3 months later, the Secretary of State may send over the files saying, who voted, and I'll know if it worked or not. This, if no one's clicking the ad, I know it's working. If people are clicking and sending in ballots and early voting, I know it's working. So I tend to lean a little bit more towards what we're doing right now.
Do we have one more?
Hold on.
Yep, have one more.
Hi, Doug. Joe Mandisi from Media Post. So clearly you're in the golden age of data targeting. I'm just wondering, are you thinking at all about the GDPR and what's going on in Europe and how that could impact American election data gathering and targeting? Historically in the US, we've invoked a rule that elections and campaigns were immune from those kinds of things, but the GDPR is taking it pretty seriously and they hold a different standard. Do you think there's any kind of chilling effect that could occur because of that?
I wouldn't say a chilling effect right now. I mean, we'll wait to see what actual decisions get made. I don't want to make any presumptions until we would start passing laws in our country that would be congruent with those, or make changes that would be more like that. I think the biggest difference that you're going to see is right now from the vendors themselves, and that's what you're seeing with Twitter and Facebook. Those are the decisions that are going to start affecting how online buying is happening.
Well, and let me wrap with that final question that you sort of teased at, which is just greater scrutiny, that these channels are now being watched on a level and in a way, both by the opposition and by the press, that they hadn't been before. Is that you were measuring strategy using the social channels?
I mean, it's going to change, I think, a lot for what from the RNC, I think people are going to get bored watching most of our ads, for the most part, if you're watching 15 different versions of telling a person to vote. But if you're messaging and you're trying to come up with messages, whether that's Second Amendment rights, a whole list of things, I think you're going to see a lot of articles coming out from basically the DC newspaper. So you're going to see a lot of Washington Post, a lot of The Hill, a lot of roll call, Media Post as well, probably, writing about the actual ads and what the spend is like on the ads and why did we pull an ad after 2 weeks of running one. So this cycle, I think, is going to be a lot more just scrutiny over the types of stuff we're doing, and probably questions that most of us don't want to have to answer because we know is probably just because an ad wasn't performing well, or because an ad was performing better than the other ones, and that's why we put more money behind it, that there wasn't some sort of sinister plot or some sort of different idea that was going on there, or even a messaging idea behind it. We just saw something working. So to that point, I think that's going to be the effect, is a lot more questions are going to be happening. And when you're trying to message for candidates, it's going to be a lot harder to do these hyper-targeted messages when everyone is looking at them and when there's going to be news stories written about it.
And you'll be talking to the press office more than you ever have before.
Yes, unfortunately.
Doug Hochberg, thank you very much. Great. Thank you very much.